Rising tax burden. The amount of tax we pay is on course to rise by more under this Parliament than during any other since the Second World War. The former Home Secretary Priti Patel has been speaking exclusively to GB News.
Tax burden is now at a 70-year high. That is unsustainable, and the people that pay the taxes are hard-pressed Brits around the country.
And winter bills support. The government is under pressure to provide more financial assistance to help with energy bills this winter. Bills that are for some maybe higher than last year.
Immigration concerns. A new poll shows worries over immigration has reached the highest level for 6 years. 1 in 4 people say it's the most important issue facing the country today. We're asking, do you agree?
Sycamore stump. A teenager has now been arrested after the iconic Sycamore gap tree was felled overnight. The tree was made famous when it appeared in Kevin Costner's 1991 film Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves.
And that picture there makes me feel so sad. It's almost like a crime scene around the Robin Hood tree. Do you see the single rose that has been laid there in tribute? It's really made me feel quite sad, that felling of that tree. So do let us know what you think about that. And what should be done now? Should that tree be repurposed into a bench or something like that? Do let us know. Or a few benches, I think it's quite big, isn't it? GBNews at gbnews.com. Do get in touch with us today. But first, let's get a news roundup for you.
Ellie, thanks very much. Good morning from the GB Newsroom. I'm Tamsin Roberts. It's 9:32. A 17-year-old boy is to appear in court after being charged with the murder of a 15-year-old girl in South London. Eliane Andam was stabbed to death in Croydon on Wednesday while she was on her way to school. Tributes have been pouring in for the victim's family, including actor Idris Elba, who says tougher deterrence and punishments need to be put in place for people who carry weapons. The Chancellor says the economy recovered from the pandemic faster than expected after it grew by 0.3% in the first quarter of this year. Office for National Statistics initially expected it to rise by 0.1%. Jeremy Hunt says the government will stick to its plan of halving inflation this year. Some single-use plastic items will be banned in England from Sunday. This includes products like plastic cutlery, plates and polystyrene cups. Councils across the country will be required to enforce the ban locally through their trading standards teams. There'll also be restrictions for single-use plastic plates, bowls and trays. There are calls for the Prime Minister to help people with their energy bills this winter. In an open letter, 140 organisations, including Citizens Advice and Age UK, are urging the government to support vulnerable households. Bills are expected to be around 13% higher than last winter. The government says its measures in place, including the energy price guarantee. Well, you can get more on all of those stories. Just visit our website, gbnews.com. Now back to Ellie and Tom.
Well, a very good morning to you. This is Britain's Newsroom, and we're awash with news about the economy this morning. The economy grew faster than expected between January and March, 3 times faster, in fact. And yet, on the other side of the ledger, the tax burden is at a 70-year high. Let's have a listen to what Dame Priti Patel told exclusively to GB News.
Tax burden is now at a 70-year high. That is unsustainable, and the people that pay the taxes are hard-pressed Brits around the country. As Conservatives, we believe in lower taxes. As Conservatives, we believe being on the side of hard-working households and families. As Conservatives, we believe in hope and aspiration.
So what does that look like now?
That should mean lower taxes. The burden of tax has to start to come down. However, look at the cycle that we're in right now. We've got one more fiscal cycle potentially before a general election. And it's not just about being bold or ambitious, it's about being conservative and ensuring that the public keep more of the money that they earn, rather than seeing the size of the state continue to grow, which Chopper it has done.
Yep.
I'm sure you've written about this and you've spoken about this before. That's the space that we need to be in. Reduce the size of the state and ensure that people keep, more of their income. This is just a fundamental conservative principle.
What do you make of it, Tom?
Well, it's clear that Priti Patel feels strongly about this, and cynical people might be thinking this is someone who used to hold a great office of state, very senior, respected Conservative MP. Might she be thinking, what does the Parliamentary Conservative Party, what does the membership of the Conservative Party in the country want to hear? Is this the beginning of a nascent leadership campaign, perhaps?
But that's what interests me. I think Suella Braverman and speaking this week about refugee and asylum cases, and now the timing of this interview with Priti Patel, it does make you think, doesn't it, with the Tory conference at the weekend, with a general election perhaps in a year's time, are you looking at the next leader of the Conservative Party, or perhaps just bidding for a position in cabinet? But does she not have a point here? With the economy growing faster than expected, 3 times faster than expected, there is more money than we thought, and with 1 year to go before a general election, Conservative voters, would-be Conservative voters, want to hear that they can have lower taxes.
That's certainly true, although I think there is always the temptation to say 3 times faster than we thought. Isn't that wonderful? This is a difference between 0.1% growth and 0.3% growth. So, yeah, it's good news, but this is still overall not the fastest growth in the world. What it is faster than some of our European colleagues, and this does bring the sort of question of Brexit into the fore, I suppose. There had been the narrative that Britain was doing so much worse than countries like France or Germany. Now it's clear that Britain is actually growing faster than Germany. Although, on the other side of the ledger, the UK is still growing a lot less quickly than the United States of America or Canada. So just because we're part of that European mainstream of growth, or faster than some European countries, comparing us to a country like America, it does seem like we're still growing very slowly.
And politically, it is so interesting that this now puts her at odds with the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Jeremy Hunt, saying that tax cuts can only come by increasing growth and getting public spending under control. Essentially, he's saying that inflation needs to come down before we can have tax cuts. Some say that these higher taxes can never be reversed. It's not what Priti Patel is saying.
No, and I think it's really interesting looking at sort of the projections for spending in the future. We're an ageing society. There are more people who are going to make up that older proportion of society than at any other point before when we've had, for example, a state pension. That means that more money needs to be spent on things like that. We know an ageing population also means that there are more demands for NHS spending. There's more demands for so much more spending in so many different parts of the economy, and proportionally fewer people in work making that money. So just demographically, there's a big challenge there.
And the whole Priti Patel interview in full we will be sharing with you during the show this morning on Britain's Newsroom, so do stay tuned for that. And she does talk about shrinking the size of the welfare state as well, so you do want to stay tuned for that. But joining us now to discuss all of this is the former Labour MP, Simon Danczuk. Really good to see you this morning, Simon. Thank you so much. So we just saw that clip from Priti Patel there saying that taxes are at a 70-year high. It is unsustainable, in her words. What do you make of it?
I think she's absolutely right, and Priti Patel often speaks a lot of sense, and I think she's doing in this instance. Quite incredible that taxes have increased so much under a Conservative government. Complete mismanagement over a number of years in relation to a whole range of different issues. That's what's got us where we are, and the public will not be happy about it, and that's probably why the Conservatives will lose the next general election.
And yet, Simon, when Liz Truss tried to do something about this, perhaps too fast, perhaps too far, when she tried to reverse the trend of ever-increasing taxes, there seemed to be a big backlash, perhaps because no one could admit that if you want to reduce taxes, you also have to reduce spending.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the theory was absolutely right. She just didn't sell it very well at all. But I think Liz Truss has been proven right in some respects in terms of what her approach was. She just didn't sell it to the markets. But what we've had in terms of government over a number of years is failure. You mentioned more people retiring. Some people in the public sector are retiring at the age of 60. I mean, this is incredible. People should be working this day and age, much longer than that. So taxpayers have to pay for that. So people have been retiring too young. The pandemic, and you mentioned America, we subsidised individuals through furlough, whilst America subsidised business, and that made a big difference in terms of growth throughout the pandemic. So we've made a number of mistakes. Productivity is very low, particularly in the public sector, so the taxpayer is paying for that. We've not regulated large corporations, whether it's British Gas, the energy companies, making huge profits at the expense of British taxpayers. So there's a whole lack of regulation that's gone on for a number of years. A Conservative government you would have expected to have got a grip of this, and they haven't.
The IFS has been speaking this morning, Institute for Fiscal Studies, this is on the front page of the Times, saying that Britain is making a decisive and permanent shift to a higher tax economy. That's from the think tank. And that's going to intensify the pressure on Rishi Sunak to buck this trend.
Yeah, absolutely. But there doesn't seem to be any initiative from either Rishi Sunak or Jeremy Hunt in terms of addressing this. Jeremy Hunt is talking tough, saying that the only priority is to get inflation down, which I understand. But we can't continually charge individuals, but also businesses, the levels of corporation tax that we're charging. That will kill growth. As you pointed out, we have had greater growth, but it's not significant, especially compared to America. So the tax burden, not just on individual families, which is now £3,500 a year, I think, it has to be lower for business as well.
But you've seen how politics works up close. You used to sit on those green benches, and I wonder, is it too cynical to expect that perhaps in a March budget, the Chancellor might magically find some money down the back of the sofa, might say that growth is higher than was expected, we've found some money potentially for a pre-election tax cut?
And that's what it will look like. So he's got a problem there, I think. If he does do that, they can't win in some respects. I think Priti Patel and Suella Braverman, as you were pointing out, who are on the right of the Conservative Party, are trying to apply pressure, perhaps position for after the general election if it's not a Conservative win, so that they can go for the leadership. So there's immense pressure on Sunak to win the election, to keep the Conservatives in power. But the public will be cynical about any tax cuts that are imminent now because we're leading up to a general election. So in many respects, they can't really win.
Well, but then maybe it's what would-be Conservative voters actually want to hear. Interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Simon, stay with us because we do want you to react to this as well, because the Economic Secretary to the Treasury, Andrew Griffith, spoke to Breakfast this morning about calls for more winter bill support in the face of potential higher bills.
There are payments for the most vulnerable to help with the cost of living across this winter. That comes on top of an average benefit per household of about £3,300 over last year and the year before. And that's a very significant amount of money. People didn't always see that because that was spent directly on shielding people from their bills in the first place. But that's come at a very significant cost. As we look to make sure the public finances are in as good shape as possible, and ultimately to get back to an economy as a Conservative that I want to see where people keep more of what they earn, we have to make these choices. But to be clear, there is support this winter for the most vulnerable. Payments will be going out into people's accounts in the coming months and over the course of the winter.
So Andrew Griffith there saying that there is support, but unlike last year where the support was for everyone, now it's just targeted on the very poorest. And I suppose that means there will be this missing middle, people who are sort of squeezed in the middle, who might want that support, who might not feel very well off, but this year they're not getting that support.
No, well, if we tackle these issues at the root cause, we'd be in a better place. The reality is that the energy companies are not very well regulated. I believe, ripping people off, whether it's in terms of payment meters, profits that they're making are far too high. We need a better energy market. That's the reality of it. And successive governments have failed in terms of energy. As you well know, no nuclear power being created for many, many years. Labour are no better. They're proposing to shut down extracting gas and oil from the North Sea. I mean, it's madness. So politicians...
It's remarkable that the last nuclear power station to be built in this country was approved by Margaret Thatcher in 1988.
Yes.
We've had more than 30 years of just sclerotic indecision on this.
Absolutely, and that gets us to a position where government are having to shove taxpayers' money into taxpayers' accounts to try and satisfy the high price of energy. I mean, it's a madness. It's a mad situation that we find ourselves in, and government need to take a lead. The public want some decisive politicians who will provide some very strong leadership, and they haven't been getting that for successive years. I'm not sure they'll get it under Keir Starmer if he wins the general election, but that's what the public want.
But
and that's
Keir Starmer is saying this sort of catchphrase about sticking plaster politics, that we're doing all of this sort of, we haven't fixed the stuff at the start, we haven't fixed energy generation, so now we have to sort of sticking plaster extra cash into people's pockets. Isn't that just what you're saying as well?
Well, his description of it is right, and he is beginning to formulate a plan in terms of where he wants to take the country. But every time he does that, it seems to have holes in it. So his strategy isn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out over the next 12 months as we get closer to that general election.
How hard do you think this winter is going to be for people?
Yeah, no doubt about it. It will be tough, and that's the dilemma that the Conservatives got. Because of inaction previously, as we pointed out, they're now having to put money into taxpayers' pockets to subsidise the energy industry. How we've got in this situation is just an absolute nightmare. But it's going to be tough for people, absolutely. And they've, as you've pointed out, they've pulled some of the money back for those, particularly middle earners, who won't have enough to spend or enough to pay for their energy costs.
Well, 140 organisations now calling for the government to stick to its promise to introduce a social tariff, but then we've got sources in the papers today saying the government have called on the idea because of the expense, and also it's very difficult to accurately target those who are most in need.
Yes, and the Treasury's always found that very difficult. But this is the whole dilemma, isn't it? We're taxing far too much, and then we're trying to subsidise people far too much, and something has to give. We're spending too much, which means we're taxing too much, so we have to spend less. And that's where Priti Patel is coming from, and that's where I agree with her completely.
It's so interesting, the two halves of this conversation. We start off talking about why is the tax burden so high, 70-year high. The second half of this we see in the papers, we see across the political spectrum, why aren't we spending more money on subsidising energy? And these two halves of the conversation, they fit together so neatly. So much demand for spending. Of course, the taxes have risen. Simon Janchuk, thank you so much for talking us through those big issues.
Very good to see you. And do let us know what you make of both of those stories. Would you like to see a social tariff when it comes to energy bills? Are you worried about this winter? And how do you react to tax at the moment being the highest level since World War II? Is Priti Patel right? Is it time for our taxes to start coming down? Are they unsustainable? Do let us know. gbnews@gbnews.com.
But in other news this morning, the Institute of Economic Affairs warns that a disposable vape ban being considered at the moment by the government could be harmful.
Yes, they say that 35% of adult vapers use disposables, and banning them might push some of those adults back to smoking.
The IEA goes on instead to suggest that enforcing existing laws against underage vaping could be used instead of a broad-based ban.
Well, there are plenty of concerns that these vapes are aimed at children too.
Well, joining us now is Christopher Snowdon, Head of Lifestyle Economics at the IEA, and John Dunn from the UK vaping industry. Thank you both for being with us today. John, let's start with you. It's clear, isn't it, that some of these brightly coloured highlighter-style vaping pens are aimed at children.
Well, what's clear is that some of the products that are illegally on the market, yes, are aimed towards that demographic. But this is just highlights some of the issues with the current legislation. And one of the things that we've been asking the government to do is to ask MHRA, who regulates vaping products in this country, to look at things like packaging and product design, which they're not doing at the moment. And this is allowing a lot of these products that are coming in using cartoon characters, for instance, or ripping off well-known IP to survive in this marketplace. And the second issue is that there's very little monetary disincentive for companies not to do this. You know, where are the big fines that the UK VIA has been calling for? The fact is they don't exist.
And Christopher Snowdon, let's bring you in at this point, because you are from the Institute of Economic Affairs, and you are concerned, aren't you, that if you push this ban on disposable vapes, then adults that were smoking, moved over to vapes, will then find their way back to smoking, which we know is more harmful.
Yeah, that is absolutely one of the concerns. Also, of course, the teenagers who are currently using these products may well decide to start smoking. Plus, you've got the issue that John's already mentioned there about the illegal vapes, the black market vapes, which is a point that's often underlooked. It's not just that you've got retailers selling vapes to people underage illegally. It's that the vapes themselves are very often illegal, unregulated. And you know, we're not enforcing these laws as it is, apparently. We're not enforcing the littering law, which is another issue people have with disposable vapes. You know, all the laws we need to deal with this issue are already available. If we ban disposable vapes, are we going to even enforce that law? If you look at Australia, where they've had repeated bans on e-cigarettes, and in fact, e-cigarettes with nicotine have never been legal. They've actually got more youth vapers in Australia than we do here. So we need to take enforcement a lot more seriously rather than just banning things, because, as you say, you know, there is a very strong chance that at least some of the people, some of the many adults who've taken on disposable vapes in the last couple of years will revert to smoking.
John, to what extent is it the fault of your industry that there are clearly children walking into corner shops up and down the country? There will be children going into corner shops this morning, walking up, buying vapes that are legally on the market, but not legally able to be sold to children, and they'll be buying them without any questions asked.
Well, I think Chris brings up a very good point, and it's something that we've been pushing for again as an industry. We want to see the regulations that are currently in place enforced, but enforced with massive penalties. So we want to see stores that are selling vape products to be regulated, and part of that has to include, like alcohol, robust age verification processes in place. And secondly, stores that do break the law need to be punished. They need to have massive fines that make it financially, the financial disincentive for them to do it. Right now, stores are not being fined, so there's no disincentive for a retailer to sell to children. I don't buy the excuse that some retailers use. They go, "We didn't know it was illegal." I'm sorry, but everybody knows it's not legal to sell these products to minors. But unless there's the £10,000 fine that we're asking the government to implement, unless that's in place, nothing's going to change. Now, I find it funny that the government has announced that they're going to do that for cigarettes, but not for e-cigarettes, and I want to know why.
OK, Chris, I mean, digging into these stats here, your figures from the IEA, it is absolutely fascinating, isn't it? The cigarette use amongst teenagers has almost totally fallen off, 4% down to just 1% of teenagers smoking since 2012. 7.6% are now smoking vapes. But don't you have concerns, as though we don't know enough about vapes still? They still could be harmful.
Oh, yeah, of course. No one denies that there might be some risk in some way. I mean, I've been vaping for 13 years and seem to be doing OK. If anybody wants to study me, they're very welcome to. Depends what you call the long term, I guess. What we do know has been established by health agencies all over the world is that it's very unlikely that vapes carry anything like, they say it's at least 95% safer, and it could well be 99, who knows what it is, but it's a lot safer. Point is, though, kids shouldn't be using them. They're primarily designed for adult smokers. Adult smokers are their main user base, and indeed adult ex-smokers like myself. So let's try and keep it that way. But there is no precedent that I can think of a product being banned completely just because children are getting a hold of it. You know, children find it more difficult, I think, to get hold of vodka and cigarettes than they do with vapes, and that's something that the government needs to work on. But nobody talks about banning vodka because kids are getting hold of it. This seems to me unprecedented, a huge overreaction, and a failure of law enforcement.
John, just to end with you, I know you'll be talking to the government all the time in this sort of scoping exercise that is being undertaken now. How likely do you think it is that the government genuinely wants to ban these disposable vapes? Or is this just sort of placating a pretty loud lobby group and they'll come up with something more akin to enforcement rather than an outright ban?
Well, we're lucky in this country that we have a government and a health department that understands the value of vaping. It is the most successful way that adults quit smoking in this country. It's more successful than all of the other methods combined. So they don't want to mess with that because they do have a smoking cessation goal of 2030 in the UK. Ash came out with a report this month that said in the lower income areas, that's probably going to be closer to 2050. So we have to encourage more adult smokers to look at safer alternatives to get them off of smoking. But absolutely, we have to make sure that young people are not easily getting these products. And that's where we need to cut it off at source at these rogue retailers who are breaking the law. That's where the problem lies.
Well, John Dunn from the UK Vaping Association, or Industry Association, I'd say, and Chris Snowden from the Institute of Economic Affairs, thank you both for a very interesting discussion there.
Yeah, and do let us know what you make about that. Should we ban disposable vapes, or do we just need to enforce them better, especially when it comes to underage vapers? Let us know. GBNews, gbnews.com. Here's the weather.
Good morning, I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. A fine Friday for the vast majority. Brighton, a bit breezy, sunny spells, a few showers here and there. Starting off with a little bit of rain across East Anglia and the southeast. Quite wet last night, wasn't it? But that rain has mostly cleared away. We've still got plenty of showers packing in across the Highlands, the Western Isles and the Northern Isles. Staying blustery here. A few scattered showers for Northern Ireland, maybe the odd one for northwest England and Wales. But most places, certainly in the south and east, will stay dry. A bit more sunshine compared to yesterday. And feeling pleasant enough in the sunshine. The southeast, 21, that's 70 Fahrenheit. Elsewhere, we're talking 16 to 18 Celsius. Feeling cooler, though, with the gusty winds and the showers in northern Scotland. They'll keep going well into the evening. For most, though, it's a fine evening. Lengthy, clear spells as well. That will allow it to turn a little chilly, a bit colder certainly than last night. And we're going to start the weekend in single figures in many locations and well down into single figures in the countryside. So yes, a bit chilly first thing on Saturday morning, but most will have a fine start to the weekend. Still quite blustery in the Northern Isles, still a few showers.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From Midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 10 o'clock on Friday the 29th of September. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Tom Harwood and me, Ellie Costello. Coming up for you this morning.
A rising tax burden. The amount of tax we pay is on course to rise by more under this Parliament than during any other since the Second World War. Although currently we're looking at an interview that Arlene Foster was doing with Maria Cahill. We'll be looking at that as well.
GB News has that exclusive interview with Maria Cahill a little bit later on in the programme, so you do not want to miss that.
And immigration concerns as well this morning. A new poll shows that worries over immigration have reached the highest level for 6 years. 1 in 4 people now say it's the most important issue facing the country today. Do you agree?
Sycamore stump. A teenager has been arrested after the iconic Sycamore Gap tree was felled overnight. The tree was made famous when it appeared in Kevin Costner's 1991 film Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves.
Do you know what, Ellie? I think you're winning me round. The more I see the picture, the single rose there.
It's so upsetting.
It's really genuinely sad. Your thoughts on the tree? What should be done? What punishment should be laid out for the individual who felled this tree? GBviews at gbnews.com is the address to write into. But first, here's your morning news with Tamsin.
Tom, thanks very much. Good morning from the GB Newsroom at 1 minute past 10. Well, we can just start with some breaking news now. A coach has been left on its side after a crash on the M53 in Merseyside. That's between Hutton and Bebington. There are unconfirmed reports from eyewitnesses that it was carrying school children. The incident happened just after 8 o'clock and all emergency services, including the air ambulance service, are at the scene and parts of the motorway in both directions are shut. So we will bring you more on that story as we get it this morning. Other news now, a 17-year-old boy is to appear in court after being charged with the murder of a 15-year-old girl in South London. Eliane Andam was stabbed to death in Croydon on Wednesday while she was on her way to school. Tributes have been pouring in for the victim's family, including from actor Idris Elba. He says tougher deterrents and punishments need to be put in place for people who carry weapons. The Chancellor says the economy recovered from the pandemic faster than expected after it grew by 0.3% in the first quarter of this year. The Office for National Statistics initially expected it to rise by 0.1%. Economic Secretary to the Treasury, Andrew Griffith, says the government will stick to its plan of halving inflation this year.
Our economic plans are on track. The UK avoided recession. The priority for us right now is to bear down on inflation. That plan is also working. We're on track. We've got to stay focused on that because that's an invidious tax rise that hits across the whole economy, which is why we're willing to make tough decisions to deliver that reduction in inflation, which is the path to lower interest rates and people having a better standard of living.
More people are cashing in their pension early, and Labour says it's due to the cost of living crisis. New figures show more than 900,000 people took their pensions early in the last financial year, a 45% rise on the year before. Labour's Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary Liz Kendall says the living standards of future retirees has been put at risk by the government's economic mismanagement. Some single-use plastic items will be banned in England from Sunday. This includes products like plastic cutlery, plates and polystyrene cups. Councils across the country will be required to enforce the ban locally through their trading standards teams. More than 140 organisations are calling on the Prime Minister to help people with their energy bills this winter. In an open letter, the companies and MPs are urging the government to support vulnerable households. Bills are expected to be around 13% higher than last winter. The government says it has measures in place, including the energy price guarantee. Dame Priti Patel is calling for a tax cut for hard-pressed Brits around the country. In an exclusive interview with the GB News political editor Chris Hope, the former Home Secretary says the government should cut public spending to ease the tax burden. Her comments add pressure on the Prime Minister and Chancellor ahead of the Conservative Party conference in Manchester tomorrow.
The tax burden is now at a 70-year high. That is unsustainable, and the people that pay the taxes are hard-pressed Brits around the country. As Conservatives, we believe in lower taxes. As Conservatives, we believe being on the side of hard-working households and families. As Conservatives, we believe in hope and aspiration.
So what does that look like now?
That should mean lower taxes. The burden of tax has to start to come down. Reduce the size of the state and ensure that people keep, more of their income.
Rail passengers will see chaos over the next 2 days as train drivers begin industrial action. ASLEF members begin a ban on overtime today ahead of a strike at 16 train companies tomorrow. The union says tomorrow's walkout will force operators to cancel all services. ASLEF's General Secretary, Mick Whelan, argues members haven't had a pay rise for 4 years. The government and Rail Delivery Group says there's a fair and reasonable offer on the table. As the government is reportedly considering bringing in a ban on disposable vapes, the Institute of Economic Affairs is warning that it could cost lives. The organisation says more than a third of adult vapers use disposables, and prohibiting them could result in some returning to smoking cigarettes, while doing little to stop underage vaping. 7.6% of 11 to 17-year-olds are currently e-cigarette users. The IEA says the government should instead enforce existing laws against underage vaping. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Ellie and Tom.
Thanks, Tamsin. It's 7 minutes past 10. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Tom Howard and me, Ellie Costello. And let's delve into the inbox now, shall we, and see what you've been saying at home about the Sycamore tree. It's such a sad story. It's really upset me this morning. It's this beautiful 300-year-old tree that's graced Hadrian's Wall. A vandal, essentially, has felled it overnight. So we've asked you how you feel about that and also what the punishment should be for the person who did it. Well, Kenny's been in touch saying the Sycamore Gap tree should be turned into a sculpture to mark where it once stood. That's a lovely idea.
And Susan says, Ellie, like you, I'm in tears about the iconic tree. I only walked to it a few months ago with my grandchildren who live a few miles from there. It's heartbreaking.
Terry says, I live close to Hadrian's Wall and I loved visiting this tree. It was one of the most beautiful symbols of the north of England. And do you know what, Tom? I think that's something that's really upset so many people. It's stolen so much joy from people who live in the north of England who, that's childhood memories, going up to see the beautiful tree. It really has united us all. But you asked, didn't you, what should happen to the vandal who cut this down? And perhaps you shouldn't have asked, because people are being very, very vocal about this.
Very forthright in the inbox. I slightly regret having asked for punishments, but Dave has written in to say whoever is responsible should be hung up by the I'm not even going to go there.
I don't think you can say that.
Flogged. Bev has written in to say flogging and make him plant another. Lynn has written in to say, as regard to tree felling, the appropriate sentence would be make a scaffold out of the wood from the tree and hang him high, which is pretty a law and order response there. And there's been another, should be stripped naked and made to walk the entire length of Hadrian's Wall, being flogged along the way. That's from Alan. Lots of flogging in the inbox this morning. And Sally has said, I think a significant number of hours of community service would be appropriate.
Perhaps
which seems
that's what will happen.
A more civilised response than some of the others.
Yes, but a 16-year-old boy has been arrested on this. What would you like to see done with the sycamore tree? I'd like to see several benches made up around the sycamore tree, and I'd also like to see the stump regrown.
Yes.
What about you?
Yeah, no, I think regrowing the stump is very, very key. And the wood, I mean, the tree is intact. Some sort of sculpture out of the wood that stays there where it was, I think would be appropriate. But you know what? It does give me hope, though, because it has united us all. You would think this is just one tree, and why do you care that one tree has been cut down? But it is. As we said earlier, just a beautiful symbol of the north of England. It is. It's heritage.
It's heritage, it's culture, it's our history, and we're all upset about it. It seems to unite us all, and that does give me hope.
Well, what a nice way to conclude that particular story. But, of course, much more this morning. Earlier this week, the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, was invested as a Dame. Now, in an exclusive interview with our own political editor, Christopher Hope, Dame Priti Patel addresses the issue of a 70-year high tax burden and the need to reduce the size of the British state.
And with the Conservative Party conference looming this weekend, speculation, as always, begins to emerge about potential leadership candidates in the future.
Dame Priti Patel, you're now a Dame. Was it OK for you?
I mean, it's a very, very humbling experience, and certainly from my point of view, I was at Windsor Castle just yesterday for my investiture. I was with my parents, and I actually think it's more about them, the sacrifices they've made to effectively support me and, becoming a public figure and doing what I've done over the years. So it was incredibly humbling, and plus on a big day such as a day of being invested, you're with others that have just given so much, to our country, public servants, and it is really a great leveller to be with, people that have also contributed to our country in many ways.
And that's to mark your public service as being a long-standing Tory MP and a cabinet minister. When you were Home Secretary, you look now at the record on migration, and the government has failed to control migration. Does that upset you?
So I think there are a number of things here. First of all, Brexit. I've always been a big champion for leaving the EU. Brexit, people know I was also involved in, before even being a Tory MP, the referendum party, and the work to at least have a referendum on our relationship with Europe. We have to look at context. Context matters. So yes, we left the EU, famously so, Oven Ready Deal, Withdrawal Act. But then look at the state of the world and what has happened since. We can't just then holler about net migration figures and basically say it's a disgrace. The point about Brexit and migration is control. And we said that we would control migration. And that brings me to my point about the legal system that we have. So safe and legal routes, bringing people over here. And also people that come here to work. People come to the United Kingdom through legal routes. NHS visas, for example, technology visas, investor visas. They come here for good reasons, and also students who come to study in our universities.
600,000 people came here in a year to June last year.
That's right.
Is that uncontrolled or is that acceptable?
So, well, it's controlled because they're here legally. So we can't start saying because the numbers are high, it's totally uncontrolled. Now, you can have a conversation about capping it. That's different. And of course, the government has levers, absolutely has levers to bring in caps. You can cap student numbers. You can cap people that come in through various visa routes. And clearly, it's right. I think it's absolutely right. I started the work on this before I left government last year. Remember, I left government out of choice. We started the work in the Home Office as to how to look at the caps and controls around different cohorts of people that come to our country legally.
And can Rwanda, the Rwanda plan, stop the
So
votes?
I am very pro-Rwanda. Obviously, I set up
your idea originally?
Well, I set up and negotiated the Economic and Development Partnership. It's going through the courts. I'm absolutely certain that it's legal. I worked on the legalities of it. Rwanda will be a tremendous deterrent, and that's what we need. We don't need slogans, we don't need platitudes, we need a deterrent, and Rwanda is a powerful deterrent. And in fact, I've had many conversations still with my former counterparts in Rwanda and their teams. They are doing tremendous work as a country in terms of resettling refugees. And the point about Rwanda, and I remember going to the United Nations in Geneva, speaking to UNHCR about this last year, is that it raises the bar when it comes to how we and the world can change this whole issue of illegal migration and small boats and all the rest of it by having third countries that we work with to resettle people, rather than fueling this trade in illegal migration and people trafficking.
Moving away from home affairs, tax. You mentioned tax there. Is it time to start cutting taxes? Show some idea of where taxation should go in the Tory party?
So you will not be surprised by my own views on this. The tax burden is now at a 70-year high. That is unsustainable. And the people that pay the taxes are hard-pressed Brits around the country. As Conservatives, we believe in lower taxes. As Conservatives, we believe being on the side of hard-working households and families. As Conservatives, we believe in hope and aspiration.
So what does that look like now?
That should mean lower taxes. The burden of tax has to start to come down. However, look at the cycle that we're in right now. We've got one more fiscal cycle potentially before a general election. And it's not just about being bold or ambitious, it's about being conservative and ensuring that the public keep more of the money that they earn, rather than seeing the size of the state continue to grow, which Chopper it has done.
Yep.
I'm sure you've written about this and you've spoken about this before. That's the space that we need to be in. Reduce the size of the state and ensure that people keep, more of their income. This is just a fundamental Conservative principle that we must stand by.
The Chancellor says that cutting inflation is the same as a tax cut. Is that acceptable, or do you want to go further than that?
I actually think you have to separate the two. Now, number one, we know why there are a range of inflationary pressures, but at the same time, I do recall a rather, successful Conservative Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, who was able to tackle inflation while growing the economy, speaking about economic growth.
And just finally, there was speculation, a year ago, or a bit more than a year ago, you might be leader of the Tory party. Do you regret not standing?
I absolutely don't. I made my choice very clearly. I felt personally very disaffected and disappointed with everything that happened last year. I don't think the public will forget, basically, the gamesmanship, the shenanigans that took place, since we've seen two democratically elected leaders of the Conservative Party being, kicked out of office, hounded out of office, basically. I don't support that. I don't think that's right. I think at the end of the day, our party members should decide, and ultimately the public should decide. But, the reality is now we have to be forward-facing. We're looking ahead to a general election over the next 12 months. I want my party to be successful. I want my party to be, with conviction, speak about Conservative policies and principles. But I also want my party, particularly in Westminster, to respect our grassroots.
Do you want to be leader?
Well, look, I want Conservative successes, first of all. And right now, we're in a very challenging position. I don't think we should say this is all straightforward. We have to level with the public. We have to be honest about what we're going to deliver for them. Because quite frankly, where we are is a very different world from 2019 and that manifesto from 2019. I think we have to demonstrate honesty, commitment to our country, but also to our own supporters as well, who also feel very disillusioned. That's certainly my focus. And obviously, I will play my part to support a Conservative government when it comes to campaigning for a Conservative government.
Yeah, well, Dame Priti Patel, thank you for joining us today on GB News. Thank you.
Well, we're joined now by Christopher Hope from Westminster. Good morning to you, Christopher. Very good to see you. Your exclusive interview with Priti Patel, first one since she became a Dame. What did you make of the fact she wants to see tax cuts before the next election? Very interesting that puts her directly at odds with Rishi Sunak and the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt.
Well, that's right, because, of course, the view from the Chancellor is that cutting inflation is the best tax cut. Whenever we ask the Prime Minister, if I'd asked him, he said the same thing, didn't he, for GB News a few weeks ago. Cutting inflation means we all get a bit better off. Of course, that means prices don't go up as much as they were before. But the political thing is cutting taxes, and that's where you differentiate between Labour and the Conservatives. That report out today from the IFS, the Institute of Fiscal Studies, showing that we're on course to have an increase to 37% of national income spent on tax by next year, up from 33% last year. That is an enormous jump in just one parliament. There's a war on in Ukraine, COVID has happened, we know the reasons, but we're going into an election cycle now when they've got to start doing something on tax. Voters will be correctly asking, how am I better off under the Tories? And it's not clear, because the Tories have not really gripped cutting taxes properly, really arguably, since they became into power 13 years ago. I was struck by the end question I put to Priti Patel, whether she wanted to be leader, she completely dodged the question and said, I want a series of Conservative successes. She talked also in an interview about the grassroots, and she does feel, I think, if I'm reading it right, that she is the champion of the grassroots. She feels that two popular MPs amongst the grassroots have been forced out from Prime Minister, that's Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, and she sees that as the kind of almost, that is a disconnect between the base and the party's MPs.
Now, absolutely fascinating stuff there. And of course, Priti Patel deeply involved with the organisation known as the Conservative Democratic Organisation that wants more internal party democracy, was seen as being very pro-Boris, very pro-Liz Truss. Anguish, really, from many members at the fact that MPs removed those prime ministers without consulting members. I wonder, over the next 4 or 5 days in Manchester, as the party faithful all descend, is this going to be a bit of a catwalk for potential leadership candidates? Do these people think that the next election is lost and that this is their time to sort of show some leg?
Yes, did you say perp walk or catwalk, Tom? I couldn't quite make out. No, yes, no, most definitely a catwalk. Yes, quite right. I mean, I think there's going to be lots of, on the margins of the conference, you'll have lots of people like Priti Patel and others will be fluttering their leadership feathers. They know very well that if the polls don't improve the Tory party, and they might improve, don't forget they might improve, but if they don't improve, we are facing a leadership election in the Tory party, probably nearly this time next year, probably late next year, and that they want to make sure who's going to be the champion of the right. Is that going to be Suella Braverman, who made that extraordinary speech in Washington this week as Home Secretary, or Priti Patel? And the timing of the speech, I think, going into a big conference of the Tory party, possibly the last one before the election, is just that. Who is going to be lead the party after Rishi Sunak? Mr. Sunak, of course, who I was with last night at a dinner here in Westminster, is feeling chipper. He feels that he's winning back votes. The watering down some commitments on net zero last week is working in the polls already. More plans on dealing with helping motorists this weekend. That's a big issue for GBNews. We have a campaign for motorists at the moment. That's why it matters so much, I think. So I think we are seeing the beginning of a Sunak fight back after basically a lack of politics for the past 11 months. But that might be a relief for some viewers, by the way.
Well, Chris, I have to say you're looking remarkably fresh after that boozy evening in Westminster with the Prime Minister and several cabinet ministers as well last night. I suppose just finally, should we cast a little bit of light for the audience on what exactly the Westminster Correspondents' Dinner was?
Yes, well, it was actually something I established in 2014 when I was chairman of the press gallery. Essentially, it mimics the White House Correspondents' Dinner. The idea is to have an opportunity for our leaders and maybe the Prime Minister to speak in a jokey way, not serious. And he made a speech to about 200 journalists, my colleagues in the press gallery, along with some members of the cabinet. Chris Heaton-Harris, Greg Hands was there, Theresa Coffey, and so he made a few digs there at Matthew Hancock. It was off camera, so we couldn't bring images for you for today on GB News. But it was a chance to everyone let their hair down after what is quite a fraught time in Westminster sometimes, and see maybe the best side of our politicians.
Well, Westminster looks very beautiful this morning, and you look very bright and breezy as well, Christopher Hope. Thank you so much for speaking to us this morning. Now, do stay with us. Still to come, GB News has an exclusive interview with Maria Cahill, one of the many politicians in Northern Ireland demanding justice for the country's troubles. And she also hits out at how UK authorities have treated victims like herself. That's after this.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From Midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Britain's Newsroom. Now, we're about to see a conversation between 2 people who come from opposite ends of Northern Ireland's political spectrum, but are united in their calls for justice for the victims of the Troubles.
This week, a series of revelations are being made in a new book by Maria Cahill. The former SDLP councillor claims to have been sexually abused by her aunt's partner, who is alleged to have been part of the IRA.
The book documents the cover-up, intimidation and the continued issues surrounding legacy and reconciliation in Northern Ireland. Today, at a time when the Northern Ireland Legacy Bill has just become an Act of Parliament, the legislation offers, or aims to offer, conditional amnesty to accused killers.
Well, GB News presenter and former DUP leader Arlene Foster began by asking Maria to recount her experience at the age of 16. And just to note, there are some scenes that viewers and listeners may find disturbing.
I think I had 2 or 3 tins and I was drinking half of them to try and keep up and putting them down, and I became groggy and fell asleep and woke up then to I was being abused by this individual, and I was extremely frightened by it. I think it took a few seconds to catch on really what was happening, and I've tried to explain in the book that kind of dilemma that you have in your head, that you have to, your brain almost races in a split second, few moments, because you have to decide very quickly what you're going to do. And automatically I decided then that I was going to pretend to be sleeping. So that was my method, if you like, of just getting through each incident, and that it became a pattern of behaviour then as that went on. The IRA didn't actually come to me until 1999, so it was October, November, and they knew that there were children in and out of that house at that time, but they decided in their own kind of warped morality that they couldn't really approach me before I turned 18. So they waited, and I turned 18 in May, and they came then in October, November. So I just finished doing my A-levels when a woman appeared.
So you didn't make a complaint to the IRA came to you
and decided that they were going to investigate, in inverted commas, what had happened.
Yeah.
Tell our listeners and viewers what form that investigation took.
They didn't actually tell me initially when they did come. You know, they asked me, or told me rather, to come to a meeting that night, and when I asked what it was about, she wouldn't tell me.
So this investigation went on, sometimes you were interrogated every day, went on for months. And then I think the pinnacle of it all is when you're brought into a room with your abuser, into a small room, and he faces you.
The millennium had just happened, and we're into March, and they decided that they were going to give me these options, if you like. And thankfully I wrote them down at the time, you know. So there were a few things. I could withdraw the allegations. They could go and put the allegations, then this is all their terminology, to them. And one of the things which they decided as an option, which they then decided they chose it, if you like. So they said, oh, we had a number of options that we've been considering, but actually this is what we're going to do, was what they called a confrontation. And in, again, the IRA's warped kind of world, they decided that sometimes they could read people's body language to see who was telling the truth. Now, that sounds completely ridiculous now, but in all seriousness, at the time, that was, you know, what they were.
So bring two people together and then try and read how they react to each other.
Almost like a court. And the first thing he did was he took his trainer off, and he joked with the other individual and said, don't be mine, I hope you're not going to joke about my smelly feet, or some off-the-cuff comment, you know. Breach sat with a pen and a piece of paper, and basically then this confrontation happened between me and him, where he was basically allowed to tear strips off me. So he was shouting, you know, you're wired
calling
up,
you names,
yeah, you're a liar, and
what have you.
This didn't happen, whatever. So I found that hugely damaging, and I still find it hugely damaging. I mean,
you have sought justice through a system, and this book is a real credit to you because you've told the whole story in a very moving way. But if they won't come forward and say that that investigation took place and what happened to you took place, what does it mean for the wider situation in Northern Ireland? And indeed, the fact that Sinn Féin is on course to be in government in the Republic of Ireland?
At the point when I then did go public, Gerry Adams wrote a blog where he admitted that the IRA had moved and shot and expelled sex offenders, his words. And that was something which I had been saying for quite a long time, and really there had been a lid kept on that. So that exposed that working within the Republican movement. But he used a particular phrase where in that blog where he said there was no, quote, corporate way of verifying my claims, as he called them.
Because the IRA had gone away.
Because the IRA had left the stage.
Yeah.
And I think that poses a huge problem now for the British government, who have just brought through a legacy bill in relation to Northern Ireland, where they are relying on the cooperation of former paramilitaries to provide evidence or information to people who are nursing their hurt quietly at home, who have been bereaved or seriously injured as a result of the conflict there. If the IRA have gone, I don't believe they have, but Gerry Adams is arguing that they have. If they have gone and we follow the Republican movement's logic here, and there's no corporate way then of verifying anything anybody has been involved in, then no Republican will come forward in any legacy case to provide any meaningful information or resolution for anybody. And the British government have gone on a huge exercise here, which really has protected its own army veterans, I think. I mean, that was obviously the reason that the legislation was brought in, because they felt it was unfair. And I think what they have done, quite stupidly in my view, is put their own army veterans now on a par with the IRA members who were fighting them. So they have put them on an equal playing field. Officialdom has really treated victims shabbily in Northern Ireland for decades, you know, but then when you then try to seek some sort of justice resolution or accountability for it, every door is closed to you, and I think that is a really, really unfortunate state of events.
Well, thanks to both Arlene and to Moira for that difficult interview and really important conversation.
Yeah, really important and insightful as well. Thank you very much for that. Let's get your news bulletin now, shall we, with Tamsin.
Ellie, thank you. Here are the headlines at 10:32. A school bus has been left on its side after a crash on the M53 in Wirral. The bus was carrying pupils to a Calday Grange Grammar School and West Kirby Grammar School Merseyside Police says it received a report that a bus had struck a reservation. The incident happened just after 8 o'clock this morning between Hutton and Bebington. All emergency services, including the air ambulance service, are at the scene and parts of the motorway in both directions are shut. And some news just in. A teenage boy arrested in connection with the cutting down of one of the UK's most photographed trees has been released on bail. The tree at Sycamore Gap, next to Hadrian's Wall and close to Northumberland, was made famous in the 1991 film Robin Hood. The National Trust says it was shocked and saddened to see the iconic tree cut down. A 17-year-old boy is to appear in court after being charged with the murder of a 15-year-old girl in South London. Eliane Andam was stabbed to death in Croydon on Wednesday while she was on her way to school. Tributes have been pouring in for the victim's family, including from actor Idris Elba. He says tougher deterrents and punishments need to be put in place for people who carry weapons. The Chancellor says the economy recovered from the pandemic faster than expected after it grew by 0.3% in the first quarter of this year. The Office for National Statistics initially expected it to rise by 0.1%. Economic Secretary to the Treasury, Andrew Griffith, says the government will stick to its plan of halving inflation this year. Well, you can get more on all of those stories. Just visit our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2237 and €1.1537. The price of gold is £1,529 and 61 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,666 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
Now, do stay with us. We're going to reflect on the sad news about the felling of one of the most photographed trees in the UK, the Sycamore Gap tree at Hadrian's Wall.
This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30am.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From Midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 10:39 and you're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Ellie Costello and me, Tom Harwood.
Now, a teenage boy arrested in connection with the cutting down of one of the UK's most photographed trees has been released on bail.
The tree at Sycamore Gap next to Hadrian's Wall and close to Northumberland was made famous in the 1991 film Robin Hood. Well, Nikki Hodson and the Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill, join us now to discuss this. Nikki, first of all, what would possess someone to walk up to any tree, but particularly this such an iconic tree, and just cut it down?
Well, that's what nobody can understand. And also, it's not as simple as just spontaneously deciding to cut it down. Obviously, it's been cut down with a saw. It's, you know, it's obviously it sounds like it's been a planned incident. I think this story has really got to lots of people this week. And I think what's so upsetting about it is the kind of vandalism of something that's natural, something that's been there for hundreds of years before you, you know, has no connection to the capitalist world. Whatever you think about, you know, buildings that people put graffiti and all the rest of it, it's nothing to do with that. You know, it's been there for much longer than you have. It gives loads of people loads of pleasure. It's really good for the environment, obviously. It's a tree. And I just think it's really bizarre. And I actually really want to know what the motivation is, because I think it's actually really significant. Has the tree got a value? That means it can be sold on somewhere on the black market? I mean, I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me at all.
But they haven't even taken the tree away. I mean, we can literally see in the pictures they've just left it on the remains of Hadrian's Wall. It just looks so callous, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's absolutely bizarre. I think sometimes it comes down to just if something is famous or precious, there is a certain mindset that wants to be the person that destroys it, because this person will forever be the person who chopped down the tree at Sycamore Gap, right? And I think it's the same motivation for some people who used to shoot very endangered animals, right? There was just that. There's a really weird mindset there that most of us can't understand, but it does produce tragic stuff like this.
Are you surprised by the reaction to this, Henry?
No, this is Britain. Of course I'm not. It's a tree. Absolutely. I mean, and this is a tree that's actually worth defending. I mean, Britain goes absolutely nuts over, like, the most nondescript field if you try and build any houses or railway lines on it. So, no, something actually important and precious like this upsetting people is perfectly standard. I think the important thing is that there shouldn't be a council of despair, right? I mean, obviously this tree is gone, but it is perfectly possible to move mature trees. We've been doing it for hundreds of years. So I think that what we should do is find a mature sycamore somewhere else and plant it there, right? It won't be exactly the same tree, but you'll still get the effect, that wonderful effect between the two hills, and that means that it won't be deprived of future generations.
It is interesting. Perhaps this is a crass comparison to make. It might be a crass comparison to make, but I don't mean it in that sense. I've got a friend who grew up in New Jersey, and his response to 9/11 was to say, build them back exactly as they were before. Nothing changed, just build them back exactly as they were before and show that this awful act of mindless terrorism would not change anything about how we live our lives. And I suppose perhaps there's an analogy there with what Henry is suggesting, almost pretend it never happened. Put an almost identical tree right back there and let's get on with it.
I mean, I do think there's something... I definitely think we need to do something with the space. I don't think it should be barren, but maybe it's useful to put something different there so that you don't forget the incident. Because that's the whole point of the memorial at the Twin Towers, isn't it? It's like you can never forget what happened, but you still make it into a beautiful space, because it's actually very calming if you go to that site. And I think it's important that we collectively do something with that. It's actually... I'm just thinking about what Henry just said, actually. about, you know, people getting kudos for doing something like this, it does kind of strike me as the kind of act that would be, I don't know, on some kind of undercover social media where somebody's like secretly filmed it and placed it as a kind of like a bragging rights thing. And it does bother me that some of the kind of social media challenges we see, you know, like Mizzy, is it? The guy that goes around does all this terrible antisocial things in people's homes.
Stealing dogs and running into people's houses.
And is this an extension of that? I mean, it makes me wonder.
That reminds me, I read this morning, it's really struck me. It says, a society grows great when old men plant trees in whose shade they shall never sit under. And people are asking, touching on what you were just talking about there, is why has our society, our culture, become so vile, where we want to destroy things rather than make them great for the next generation?
I mean, I don't know. I'd be really wary about reading too much out from the act of one vandal towards society as a whole, right? Because
we're talking about Mizzy.
We don't know his motivations. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, there have always been a certain number of people in any society who are selfish, short-sighted, predatory, want to prey on that. Due to social media, we now hear a lot more about those people than we used to. You know, this, in the days before the internet, would have been probably a local story, right? It wouldn't have been national front page news. And I think sometimes, therefore, we think, in many respects, that these people are much more present. But they've always been with us. The question is, what do we do about it? And the reason I think that we should just put another tree in there and, as Tom says, just move on, is because if we do create some kind of monument, why do we want to remember this? I don't think it's particularly significant. And it becomes a monument to the crime, right? It becomes a permanent memorial. This person, if ever they go there, they can be like, yeah, I did that. Whereas what I would like is in 10 years' time, when that new tree is bedded down, when someone's like, oh, do you remember when they cut down the tree at Sycamore Gap? And they're like, what? Who did what now? No one knows. And then that way, this person doesn't get the infamy I think they wanted.
That's a really interesting point, and perhaps it pushes back on some of the... Are we being too sentimental about this specific tree? Because so much of our perhaps sense of nationhood isn't actually perhaps exactly right. I mean, you think about, again, a peculiar example, the kilt in Scotland. People in Scotland haven't been wearing the kilt for thousands of years, although it sort of feels like they have. This is actually a sort of invention of the last 200 years. And perhaps we do have these sort of myths that we construct in society to build this sense of community and nationhood.
Well, that's quite complicated, isn't it, Tom? I don't know where to start with that, really. I mean, one of the things is that actually, customs and traditions are important, but they were always invented at some point, right? So, you know, Christmas is coming up, and I'm thinking about how many of those traditions were invented in the Victorian era. We think they're, you know, we think they go back way further, and they don't. And this is different because, presumably, and I don't actually know the history of this tree was there before anybody else was, in terms of, not before Hadrian's Wall, but in terms before, you know, recent visitors came to see it. It wasn't purposefully planted there, or was it? We don't know. That might be something else that's important about it. And again, I think comparing, you know, a tradition that we've implemented that involves something that we've created is a bit different to a tree that was probably there before us. As in, nature probably planted that tree, we probably didn't. But I would like to know if that's true. Do you see what I'm saying? But I would very much like to know if that sycamore tree was deliberately planted there.
What do you think should happen to the tree now? Because it is huge. It is so tall. There is so much wood there, good wood. It was in really, really strong and solid condition. What do you think should happen with that?
I don't know. I mean, I think that would really be for the local community to decide. I mean, for me, anything that's from nature has to go back to nature, well, which includes us, but that's my personal belief. But how we do that in an appropriate way, I'm not sure.
Henry?
I mean, you could probably, if there's any kind of carpentry or woodworking shop, make mementos out of it and sell them to raise funds for the replacement quite easily.
Oh, you're very good, Henry. We should have you on a board or something. Very, very good.
You're almost too practical. Because, OK, so...
You've been very measured about this whole thing.
So one of the things we were talking a little bit earlier, we had some people write in, and I suggested, what sort of punishment should there be for this vandal? This 16-year-old boy. And my goodness me, I have never seen such a violent inbox come in. People wanted him hung, drawn and quartered and paraded naked down the wall and whipped and flogged and all the rest of it. It was... Yeah, I mean, what sort of punishment should we be looking at for this vandal?
Take him out in branches and make him stand on the stump until,
until one grows back.
I was going to say, contra passo, that's that thing in Dante where the punishment fits the crime. It means the same thing. I studied at university. So something that makes you akin to a tree. Maybe he could be a scarecrow, you know, for the fact the tree isn't there anymore.
Do you know what Anne Diamond suggested to us a little bit earlier on was that this person, 16-year-old, should then be made to now dig out all of the roots from this tree because it will be just as deep below as it was height of the tree, and that would be a task in itself. Make it a public spectacle.
Yeah.
Let us know what you think. gbviews@gbnews.com. Look, we've got to talk about this huge story today, which is a concern about immigration has reached its highest point for 6 years. This is according to a new poll out this morning. 23% of people have said immigration is now one of the most important issues facing the country today. That's now up to 26%. That's the highest point since July 2017. Henry, let's start with you, shall we? Why do you think this is such an important issue for people?
It's an interesting one, actually, because an awful lot of the people who are most concerned about immigration are the people who are often the least exposed to some of its effects. So it says here, for example, in the story, that pensioners are particularly concerned about immigration. But the people who practically have the most reason to be concerned are working-age people, particularly younger working-age people and those in sort of, I suppose, the term lower skilled jobs, right? Because they're the people who are competing, and city dwellers, right? Because that's where an awful lot of immigrants end up. So there is, for the Conservatives, it's very, very difficult because on the one hand, a lot of their voters, older voters, more traditional voters, are concerned about the headline numbers and they want them to come down. But if you actually ask those voters, OK, well, we need these workers to come in and cover your pensions because you didn't have enough children, they're even more concerned about their pensions. Whereas, ironically, an awful lot of the people who are stuck in wage competition with a lot of these workers who are stuck in inner cities, paying in a rent crisis caused by the fact that we're importing 600,000 people a year and building 200,000 houses when we're already 4 million short, they're less concerned. So politically speaking, it's a really fascinating disjuncture between the people affected by this story and the people most concerned about it.
Yeah, Nikki, what do you make of that?
Well, I think it's interesting that they're saying it's the highest for 6 years, because I personally think we have confected this fear of immigration in recent times. We, the media, are responsible for our anxiety about immigration, not just the numbers. You know, Rishi Sunak and the Tories have absolutely pushed this narrative about stop the boats and people coming in are taking from you. And the reality is the Conservatives have taken from you over the 13 years that they have been in power. They've, ruined your schools. Inflation is crazy, food prices are bonkers, houses there aren't any. It is the Tory government that made you poor, it is not immigrants.
Henry, from Conservative Home, what do you make of that?
Well, there are an awful lot of charges that can be laid at the feet of the Conservatives for the past 13 years. I don't work for the party and I can happily admit that. But I think one of the things that can be laid at the feet of the Conservative Party is that they have presided over this short-term Treasury brain approach, which insists on trying to wring a tiny amount of growth out of endlessly importing people, rather than building a stronger economy which has higher wages and stronger jobs and training for domestic people. One of the weirdest things I always find about when Conservatives talk about the immigration issue, they keep talking about fruit pickers. No one cares about fruit pickers. Fruit pickers come in, they do a good job, and then they leave again. But you've got issues like architects. Architects have been declared a shortage occupation, meaning that you can now import an architect from anywhere in the world at 80% of the going rate. Architects Journal is running articles about how people cannot afford to be architects because the wages are already so low that you can't live in places like London on those salaries. That's a real problem, and that's something that the government should have taken action on before now.
Nikki, I just want to share with you an email from a viewer, Will. We're talking obviously about the tax burden, and we know that the economy is still the #1 concern for the population as a whole. But he's kind of tying the two together, and he's saying no wonder the tax burden is so high when the cost of the hotel migrant bill is now up to £8 million a day.
Right.
And that's where he's, conflating the two issues.
I mean, the issue is the hotel migrant bill is astronomical and it's ridiculous. The reason it's ridiculous is because the Home Office has not processed people efficiently for the past decade, right? We didn't have to have this problem. And also, something that I repeatedly say on this programme is, what on earth is it about us, one, not being able to process people quickly, and why we have such a problem with people having temporary work visas while they're here being processed? Have people who are living in this country pay into the system, have them work, have them pay taxes. You don't have any problems anymore.
Isn't this the funny thing? I suppose people do conflate these two issues of illegal migration and legal migration.
Right.
Illegal migration clearly on the rise and a big concern. Perhaps that's what's driven this concern in this survey. Because, of course, last year, it was almost 12 months ago that we heard about the record high inward legal migration, 600,000 net, but of course including the Hong Kongers and Ukrainians that we took in legally. But perhaps that's why it didn't hit such high salience then. It's only really now that we're talking so much about boats and illegal arrivals that the concern has risen.
Well, yeah, but this is back to my first point. The reason everybody is so paranoid about it is because they've been fed a diet of fear about people on small boats, about why they're suffering so much and the strain on resources. You know, Suella Braverman's speech this week was absolutely insane, in my opinion.
Isn't it legitimate to be concerned about people who are coming in with no process, without not legal arrivals, illegal arrivals, who also cost the taxpayer?
But the problem isn't the immigrants, it's the process. Why are we not directing our anger at the right people, the people that are not doing anything about it? Of course we've got to control immigration. Of course we have. But, you know, I'm sick of immigrants being kind of, you know, targeted. As far as I'm concerned, the rhetoric that we now have is damaging, it's near-fascist. We are at the point of, I'm sure we're going to see more attacks on people of different ethnicities because of the hate that's been levied at them. And I live in fear because, you know, my daughter is half Asian, my husband is Asian, all my in-laws are. You know, we have to go around now feeling anxious about how people are going to treat us and what they're going to think about our family.
Henry, is Suella Braverman's rhetoric near-fascist?
I mean, no, obviously it isn't. I mean, it was a really bad speech because, as you say, it conflated completely separate issues. There are important issues about legal migration, there are important issues about illegal migration, and there are important issues about the international refugee, international law system. They are not the same issue. And I think it was deeply unhelpful, and not even just, but politically maladroit for the Conservatives to do that. So, bad speech, but important issues.
OK, Henry Hill, Nikki Hodgson, very, very good to have you both with us this morning. You're with us throughout the programme. Now, up next, revised figures show the UK economy grew faster than expected between January and March of this year. Is this good news for the Prime Minister? More to come on that in the next hour.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. +2 showers for some of us today, mostly towards the northwest. Sunny spells elsewhere, and actually it is largely fine in the south as a ridge of high pressure builds in. But we've still got low pressure to the north of Scotland. Tightly packed isobars here, so strong winds through the day. And quite a number of showers, especially for the Northern Isles, Caithness, Sutherland, parts of Aberdeenshire. Fewer showers further south. 1 or 2 for Northern Ireland, Northern England, but across the southern half of the UK, mostly it's dry with sunny spells and feeling warm with lighter winds in the south, 18 to 21 Celsius. Not feeling quite so warm with 14 or 15 in the north of Scotland. Into the evening, the showers continue for a time in the far north, but eventually they'll ease away. Likewise, the winds will begin to peter away, and so clear skies, lighter winds, well, that will lead to a cooler night compared with recent nights, with temperatures fairly widely in the single figures, and in some sheltered parts of Northern England, Northern Ireland and Scotland, low single figures. Touch of grass frost possible as we begin the weekend. But actually, Saturday gets off to a beautiful start. Plenty of sunshine across the country early on, and we keep that sunshine in the far south and southeast through the day, likewise for the north of Scotland. Elsewhere, cloud builds, and for Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland, northwest England and North Wales, outbreaks of rain move in. The rain heavy in Northern Ireland, where it will be windy as well.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From Midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's 11 o'clock on Friday, the 29th of September. A very good morning to you. This is Britain's Newsroom here on GB News with Ellie Costello and me, Tom Harwood. Coming up today.
Rising tax burden. The amount of tax we pay is on course to rise more under this Parliament than any other since the Second World War. The former Home Secretary Priti Patel has been speaking to GB News.
Tax burden is now at a 70-year high. That is unsustainable, and the people that pay the taxes are hard-pressed Brits around the country.
Winter bills support. The government's under pressure to provide more financial help with energy bills this winter. Well, that's the other side of the taxing highly ledger, isn't it? Bills that may, for some, be higher than last year.
Disappearing doctors. A report has revealed that fewer than half of trainee GPs go on to work for the NHS full-time. And the teenage boy who was arrested in connection with cutting down one of the UK's most photographed trees, which is the tree at Sycamore Gap near Hadrian's Wall, has now been released on bail. We'd love to know what you think about that story. I'm very upset about it. I know lots of you are at home. Do let us know your memories of that tree. If you live up there near Hadrian's Wall, do let us know what you think of this story. GBNews at gbnews.com. But first, let's get a news bulletin with Tamsin.
Ellie, thank you, and good morning from the GB Newsroom. It's 1 minute past 11. One person has been taken to hospital with serious injuries after a school bus overturned on the M53 in Wirral. 50 others are being assessed at the scene. The bus was carrying pupils to Calday Grange Grammar School and West Kirby Grammar School. Merseyside Police says it received a report that a bus had struck a reservation. The ambulance service says there was a collision between the coach and a car. Eyewitnesses say they saw children climbing out of the back window. The incident happened at around 8:30 this morning between Hutton and Bebington. and parts of the motorway in both directions are closed. A teenage boy arrested in connection with the cutting down of one of the UK's most photographed trees has been released on bail. The tree at Sycamore Gap, next to Hadrian's Wall, close to Northumberland, was made famous in the 1991 film Robin Hood. The National Trust says it was shocked and saddened to see the iconic tree cut down. A 17-year-old boy charged with the murder of 15-year-old Eliane Andam has been remanded in custody after appearing at a magistrate's court in London. Eliane was stabbed to death in Croydon on Wednesday while she was on her way to school. Tributes have been pouring in for the victim's family, including from actor Idris Elba, who says tougher deterrents and punishments need to be put in place for people who carry weapons. The Chancellor says the economy recovered from the pandemic faster than expected after it grew by 0.3% in the first quarter of this year. The Office for National Statistics initially expected it to rise by 0.1%. Economic Secretary to the Treasury, Andrew Griffith, says the government will stick to its plan of halving inflation this year.
Our economic plans are on track. The UK avoided recession. The priority for us right now is to bear down on inflation. That plan is also working. We're on track. We've got to stay focused on that because that's an invidious tax rise that hits across the whole economy, which is why we're willing to make tough decisions to deliver that reduction in inflation, which is the path to lower interest rates and people having a better standard of living.
More people are cashing in their pension early, and Labour says it's due to the cost of living crisis. New figures show more than 900,000 people took their pensions early in the last financial year, a 45% rise on the year before. Labour's Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary Liz Kendall says the living standards of future retirees has been put at risk by the government's economic mismanagement. More than 140 organisations are calling on the Prime Minister to help people with their energy bills this winter. In an open letter, the companies and MPs are urging the government to support vulnerable households. Bills are expected to be around 13% higher than last winter. The government says it has measures in place, including the energy price guarantee, until April next year. Dame Priti Patel is calling for a tax cut for hard-pressed Brits around the country. In an exclusive interview with GB News political editor Chris Hope, the former Home Secretary says the government should cut public spending to ease the tax burden. Her comments add pressure on the Prime Minister and Chancellor ahead of the Conservative Party conference in Manchester tomorrow.
The tax burden is now at a 70-year high. That is unsustainable, and the people that pay the taxes are hard-pressed Brits around the country. As Conservatives, we believe in lower taxes. As Conservatives, we believe being on the side of hard-working households and families. As Conservatives, we believe in hope and aspiration.
So what does that look like now?
That should mean lower taxes. The burden of tax has to start to come down. Reduce the size of the state and ensure that people keep, more of their income.
Rail passengers will see chaos over the next 2 days as train drivers begin industrial action. ASLEF members begin a ban on overtime today ahead of a strike at 16 train companies tomorrow. The union says tomorrow's walkout will force operators to cancel all services. ASLEF's General Secretary Mick Whelan argues members haven't had a pay rise for 4 years. The government and Rail Delivery Group says there's a fair and reasonable offer on the table. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Ellie and Tom.
Thanks, Tamsin. It's 11:06. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Tom Howard and me, Ellie Costello.
Now, let's see what you've been saying at home. We've been discussing so very much this morning, but particularly what has got everyone going in the inbox is this particular tree on Hadrian's Wall. Jane has written in to say the 16-year-old who cut down the tree is a kid. Kids often do things for a laugh without any thought of the consequences or the effect upon others. They know right from wrong and, of course, should be reprimanded, but prison? No way. Why turn a daft kid into a criminal?
Stuart says, I think 10-year sentence of compulsory volunteering for related charities would benefit this clearly misguided young boy, with some of the guidance and education obviously missing from his life.
And David says, although I totally agree with the general sentiment and the feelings regarding the felling of the tree, I would like you to know that the stump is left in situ, the tree will likely regenerate. And that's an interesting point.
Yeah, very similar here from Henry Hill. We're talking about what we should do with the remains of this tree because it is a huge, huge tree. Tony says wood from the fallen tree should be used to create a fitting tribute to this icon of the Northeast. Any remaining wood should be made in souvenirs for the National Trust to sell. Very good idea. It's exactly what Henry Hill was suggesting as well. Do keep those views coming in on that story or any of the stories that we've been talking about today. gbviews@gbnews.com.
Now, earlier this week, the former Home Secretary Priti Patel was invested as a Dame.
In an exclusive interview with GB News' political editor Christopher Hope, Dame Priti Patel addresses the issue of the 70-year high tax burden and a need to reduce the size of the state.
Tax burden is now at a 70-year high. That is unsustainable, and the people that pay the taxes are hard-pressed Brits around the country. As Conservatives, we believe in lower taxes. As Conservatives, we believe being on the side of hard-working households and families. As Conservatives, we believe in hope and aspiration.
So what does that look like now?
That should mean lower taxes. The burden of tax has to start to come down. However, look at the cycle that we're in right now. We've got one more fiscal cycle potentially before a general election. And it's not just about being bold or ambitious, it's about being conservative and ensuring that the public keep more of the money that they earn, rather than seeing the size of the state continue to grow, which Chopper it has done.
Yep.
I'm sure you've written about this and you've spoken about this before. That's the space that we need to be in. Reduce the size of the state and ensure that people keep, more of their income. This is just a fundamental Conservative principle.
Do feel free to sort of... Oh, hello.
Hello. We are very, very busy here because we've got Liam Halligan with us and Jasmine Birtles to react to the Priti Patel interview first and foremost. Then we'll look at the economy a little bit wider. And Tom was just organising us all, weren't you, Tom?
Trying to.
So let's start with you, Liam, and Priti Patel there, saying that taxes currently are unsustainable. Is she right?
Well, taxes are at a 70-year high. Taxes are so high that even the Lib Dems are saying they don't want to raise taxes. Obviously, in their conference last weekend, they abandoned their quarter-century-old "we will put 1p on income tax and give that money to education/health/pothole filling," depending on which particular the audience they're talking to at the time. And so the tax burden is really high. Is it any wonder we spent £400 billion during the COVID pandemic and the economy has not really got out of second gear since that pandemic? To be honest with you, Ellie, the economy hasn't really been firing on all cylinders anywhere in the Western world since the global financial crisis in the late 2000s. And this is why we have a really high tax burden. We've got demography coming through, more older people compared to more younger people needed to support them. We haven't got the expansion. Though I must say today we have had some pretty good news on the growth numbers from the ONS earlier this morning.
Take us through those, because they're a lot better than expected, aren't they?
They are slightly better than expected, even though they're quite low. So between April and June, what we call the second quarter, the second three-month period of the year, GDP rose by 0.2% compared to the previous quarter, but the first quarter was revised up from 0.1% to 0.3%, and growth in 2022 as a whole was revised up from 4.1% to 4.3%. That's a really high number for the UK, but we were sort of bouncing back because 21 was, a semi-lockdown year. And what's really interesting to me is these revisions, plus the revisions we had a month or so ago, the UK is now no longer a laggard in terms of how we've recovered from the pandemic. We've grown more since the pandemic. We've grown by 1.8%. That's more than Germany, which is like 0.2%, and more than France as well. less than the US, but the US is generally a more dynamic economy. So you can no longer say that Brexit Britain is, being dragged down by the fact that we left the European Union, given that the two biggest economies in the European Union are growing slower than we are.
It's remarkable. They were always supposedly sort of the big four in the European Union when we remember France, Germany, the UK and Italy. Of those four, I think I'm right in saying that the UK is growing faster outside of the European Union than it was on the inside. Jasmine, let's bring you in here now. We can't say that's to do with Brexit, but I suppose it does show that perhaps people jumping on these numbers before they were revised were trying to find a narrative that might not be particularly true.
Yes, and to be honest, I think that we could grow even faster if we were working together, because one of the problems that we have with, post-Brexit is that we have a significant number of people in government, in the civil service and in all sorts of areas of Britain that really want to work against Brexit. So you have those who are pro-Brexit, you have those who are against it, and so if you're working against each other, you're not going to have very much forward movement. So frankly, the fact that we've done what we've done is pretty amazing, in that situation. And I do keep reminding myself that Germany is in recession. I mean, as Liam said, the growth figures are better than expected. They are still low, but, at least there's some growth. At least it's slightly better. Whereas in Germany, they really are struggling.
I suppose in the context of the G7 and those four big countries, the G7 European countries, the UK, France, Italy and Germany, the UK is doing the best out of those four out of the pandemic. But it's a low-growth club. We're the best of the worst. And compared to the United States, which is just experiencing extraordinary growth, we're in a different league.
Well, we are. And worse than that, really, is Asia. Because, I've got a few Asian friends who are saying, Britain and Europe, they're becoming the third world countries. That's the way they're looking at it, because the growth, you look at India, you look at Vietnam, for example, Taiwan, there's extraordinary growth there. And as Liam pointed out, there's a lot of youth there, also Middle East and Africa. You've got a lot of babies being born, which we don't have so much in Europe. So we're an older, I was going to say nation, continent, and we have more to pay for. And this is not going to get easier as it goes forward.
Liam, do you think we're going to see a bit more of a stable picture now when it comes to our economy? Because recent months we've behaved really, haven't we?
I'm getting grey hair. Could be a good career move, a bit of grey hair.
There's been talk, hasn't there, about recession and whether we're going to go into one or whether we've avoided one. Is it going to stabilise now?
Just to pick up on what Tom said, the US is growing strongly. The US has grown by 6.1% since the end of the pandemic, and we've grown by 1.9%. France 1.8, Germany, as Jasmine was saying, 0.2. Germany is now the sick man of Europe because its whole business model has been built on cheap Russian gas. Are we going to see a more stable situation now? I think my sort of central assumption is that we will. Inflation's coming down. The UK seems to have dodged recession. With interest rates hopefully not going up anymore, central assumption, then growth will come to the fore. We probably will get a pre-election tax cut. We're seeing manufacturing confidence holding up. We're seeing maybe the housing market stabilising. It will start to turn. That will bring back consumer sentiment. So that's my central assumption. But you never meet a one-handed economist, right? That's on the one hand. And on the other hand, Ellie, something I've been mentioning quite a lot on GB News for quite a few weeks and months, there is a big whiz-bang, and that is the oil price and geopolitics. We're all expecting inflation to keep dropping this winter. We're all expecting cheaper energy than last winter. We're all expecting interest rates to come down. That's the central assumption of politics. But actually, look at what's happened to the oil price. The global economy is still quite sluggish, despite America. Why? Because China is growing more slowly than it has done for 30 years. It's still growing by about 4%. But a lot of property interest in China, they're looking quite shaky. A lot of people in financial markets around the world worry that China is going to be like a new Lehman Brothers.
Youth unemployment in China is extraordinary.
Absolutely. And there's signs of political unrest, which is why, but the government's very heavily indebted, so it can't just throw money at the problem like it did in the aftermath of 2008. But let's have a look. The global economy is still pretty sluggish. The demand for oil is not going gangbusters as it would be when we're growing fast. So it's not the demand for oil that's pushing the oil price up. It's gone up from $70 to $95 in 2.5 months. That's a 35% rise. That's why we're seeing really high petrol and diesel prices. Oil is going up, even though the global economy is sluggish, because of OPEC, because of the OPEC exporters cartel. They are deliberately restricting supply. They are working in conjunction with non-OPEC member Russia. The Saudi-Russia, Riyadh-Moscow axis. We should be talking about it a lot, but hardly anyone wants to address it. But it's really, really important. OPEC are squeezing global oil markets. The oil price is rising steadily. That's going to complicate our ability to escape inflation, to get out of this ghastly cost of living crisis. So, yes, Ellie, my central assumption is that it will be a bit more stable, but watch out for OPEC.
Goodness me, that does sort of highlight the fundamental instability around all of this. And I wonder if that instability is one of the reasons why 300,000 more people, Jasmine, this year cashed in their pensions compared to last year. Why are we seeing so many people cash in their pensions?
Well, firstly, because they can, because, as you know, we have pension freedoms. We've had them for a few years now. So it does mean that people over 55 potentially can cash in some or all of their pensions. And this is, you know, a good move, I think, originally by the government, because it meant that it made pensions a bit more flexible, a bit easier to deal with and more attractive. But when you have a time when, as we have had, people are really struggling to pay just their day-to-day bills, it is too much of a temptation to go into that pension pot. And the problem is that, you know, at 55 is very young. I mean, even 60, 65, you've got another 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
65's the new 45.
It really is, yes. We've got so many sort of centenarians now. That's a good long time to pay for your pension. So I'm really, really keen for people not to do this if they possibly can. What I've been saying on my website, moneymagpie.com, is to make money on the side. There are so many side earners, and a lot more people who are retired or above pensionable age are bringing these side earners in just to keep themselves going on a daily basis. That, honestly, is much better than going into your pension pot and harming your future.
It's a fascinating point. And Liam, I suppose this is actually something that the government is concerned about as well. People perhaps relying more on their pension when actually they could be a valuable part of the workforce, getting some of these side hustles in. The Chancellor's been talking about this recently.
Can I just say, if 65 is the new 45, I'm now in my mid-30s.
What were you saying about grey hair? I don't see it.
Couldn't help yourself.
Look, a lot of the reason why there are more people cashing in their pensions is simply demography, because the baby boomers are now unwinding. You know, it's just aside from all the valid points that Jasmine made there, it's just, you know, our natural demography is unwinding. Demography is destiny. It's hardwired in the birth rates, you know, in the years immediately following the Second World War and into the early and mid-50s. But if there are more people cashing in their pensions, we don't have those people in their late 50s, early 60s, mid-60s, late 60s in the workforce the way we did. And this is really hitting a lot of industries in the service sector, you know, professional driving, taxis and so on, construction, a business my family knows well. A lot of the sort of really talented older guys who are steady workers, they teach the younger guys, sort of informal apprenticeships. They're now retiring earlier.
And it cuts into a conversation we were talking about earlier, because now construction is a shortage occupation list occupation.
Sure.
You can get in foreign workers for 80% of the pay of British workers now, surely partly because people are retiring early.
Yes, but the problem with that is that means we're not training our own plumbers and chippies and sparks and bricklayers, and that then hardwires in a shortage of those vital skills into the future, which means we're less likely to build the houses that we need.
OK, our business and economics editor Liam Halligan and financial expert Jasmine Birtles. Very good to see you both this morning. Thank you very, very much.
Well, still to come, fewer than half of trainee GPs go on to work for the NHS full-time. So we'll be asking a trainee doctor if she'll be leaving too.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
And Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
At Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From Midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
A very good morning. It is 11:24 and you're with Britain's Newsroom here on GB News with Ellie Costello and me, Tom Harwood.
And sometimes he struggles to read the time.
It's always around this time that it's the, yeah.
Anyway, you did it. Very good.
It's 11:25 now.
Yes, it is. Well done. Now, a new report has revealed that fewer than half of trainee GPs go on to work for the NHS full-time.
Yes, the Health Foundation think tank also estimates that there's a shortage of 4,200 GPs across England and says this number could double within a decade.
Well, Basha Mukherjee is a junior doctor and she joins us now. Very good to see you this morning, Basha. So what's your reaction to this, that fewer than half of trainee GPs actually go on to work for the NHS full-time? Why is that?
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised at all. It's something I've considered myself. I think it's just a case of weighing, you know, cost versus benefits. The current system, it doesn't allow us, for me personally, my reasons would be, it doesn't allow me to fully enjoy my work, you know, the cost cuts all around and the workload and how much we're expected to do in like a 10-minute appointment. It doesn't make you feel very good as a doctor to be able to have to rush things and, you know, try and do as much as possible in that short time. I think it's quite a high stress environment, and it doesn't surprise me that's why people are choosing the private route or going abroad.
Are we at risk of over-interpreting these figures? These numbers not doing full-time work, lots of them will be doing part-time work, perhaps a huge proportion of part-time work. I don't know quite what this definition encompasses. They could be working for the NHS 95% of the time and still be counted as part-time. Are we at risk of over-interpreting this?
Yes, quite possibly. And I think, in that way, the radar is too highly on these GP trainees and GPs that why are they leaving and what, do they not owe it to the government or the country to stay and work? But yes, you're quite right. A lot of people are definitely working what we call less than full-time. And it's definitely a very good option, especially for in the current climate where, there's a high demand for GPs and their work, and equally there's a lot that's expected of us. So in order to find that work-life balance, I think a lot of my colleagues are definitely opting for the less than full-time route.
And Basha, I mean, this figure will obviously include the GPs and the trainee GPs who go on to work in Australia or Canada or the like, where they will earn higher salaries. And you just said just then that it's something that you have considered as well, leaving the NHS. So what has that conversation been like in your mind? Why would you want to leave the NHS? And why, in the same breath, are you proud to work for the NHS? What are the good things about the NHS?
I've always been very proud to be part of the NHS, mainly because how inspiring my colleagues have been. I've had great role models, and, it still feels amazing when you have that good patient interaction. And you know that it's not just a transactional interaction. It is something that, you're providing this service. I mean, I've worked in the NHS for 4 years now. It is a fantastic organisation. But equally, when you have to measure up with what your own life goals are, for instance, in this country, the taxation is really high compared to what we're being paid and how we're being compensated for the time and effort that takes into becoming a doctor. And also the high stress levels. I think, finding a balance. And for me personally, it's a case of affording housing and all these things. I have definitely considered going abroad for a short period of time, getting enough earnings to have a good quality of life where I'm not having to completely be bogged down with bills and worries about cost of living. And I didn't expect that when I was at school and doing my best and getting the highest grades in school. And I could say that for a lot of my colleagues as well, that absolutely we went into this profession wanting to help people, but it's the compensation in this country, it's just not good enough at present.
It's fascinating you talk about the high taxation that doctors face, because this is a conversation we've been having all morning. I suppose on the one hand, we often think about the high tax burden that this country has and actually the 40% funding increase that the NHS has had, that perhaps is a really inefficient allocation of resources. If we're taxing doctors to then put money into the NHS, probably losing some of it along the way, losing it in inefficiencies, it doesn't seem like it's a very well put together system.
And you're absolutely correct. I've been hearing all the conversations about across the board in terms of the system. I think there's something fundamentally wrong with the system when you're losing 10,000 doctors a year. And that's not just, doctors, that's nurses as well. And absolutely, the taxation system in other parts of the world are, I suppose, better weighed up in terms of to match the earnings, to match the role that the entity is playing in terms of building the economy, building the society, and in contributing to services like the NHS.
Well, Basha Mukherjee, always very, very good to see you. Thank you so much for sharing your experience on Britain's Newsroom this morning. Now, do stay with us. Still lots more to come. A ban on certain single-use plastics for food and drink begins this weekend. But can it really work if many restaurants aren't even aware of it? You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Good morning. It's 11:31. Here are the headlines. A children's hospital in Liverpool has declared a major incident after a school bus overturned on the M53. One person has been taken to hospital with serious injuries. 50 others are being assessed at the scene. The bus was carrying pupils to Calday Grange Grammar School and West Kirby Grammar School. Merseyside Police says it collided with a car and struck a central reservation. Eyewitnesses say they saw children climbing out of the back window. The incident happened at around 8:30 this morning between Hutton and Bebington, and parts of the motorway in both directions remain closed. A 17-year-old boy charged with the murder of 15-year-old Eliane Andam has been remanded in custody after appearing at court in London. Eliane was stabbed to death in Croydon on Wednesday while she was on her way to school. Tributes have been pouring in for the family, including from actor Idris Elba. He says tougher deterrents and punishments need to be put in place for people who carry weapons. A teenage boy arrested in connection with the cutting down of one of the UK's most photographed trees has been released on bail. The tree at Sycamore Gap, next to Hadrian's Wall, close to Northumberland, was made famous in the 1991 film Robin Hood. The National Trust says it was shocked and saddened to see the iconic tree cut down. The Chancellor says the economy recovered from the pandemic faster than expected after it grew by 0.3% in the first quarter of this year. The Office for National Statistics initially expected it to rise by 0.1%. The government says it will stick to its plan of halving inflation this year. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2258 and €1.1551 euros. The price of gold is £1,528 and 25 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,667 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
Well, stick with us here on Britain's Newsroom on GB News. Still to come, a ban on plastic packaging for takeaways has been branded as too expensive to enforce. More as we get it.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From Midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political budgets.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
in a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us. From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
The UK is proving doubters wrong with its economic recovery. That's according to Jeremy Hunt. And we've got two people who have an opinion on that. Nikki Hodgson, author and commentator, and Henry Hill, deputy editor at Conservative Home. Henry, let's start with you. What do you make of Jeremy Hunt's comments?
So Jeremy Hunt has come out and basically there's some new data that suggests that instead of being, worse than France and Germany and actually being smaller than we were before the pandemic, actually we're a couple of points ahead of Germany and France. And isn't that amazing? We're proving the doubters wrong. And this kind of story really frustrates me because, the narrative that we had over the last year or so has not been formed really by those charts. It's been formed by people's real experiences. Households are struggling, wages have been flat for 15 years, there is a housing and rents crisis, childcare is ruinously expensive. None of those have changed. Absolutely nothing about any of the conditions actually facing British people have changed. And yet an official body has come out, redrawn a line on a graph, and we're suddenly supposed to be cheering the government to the rafters. And it deeply frustrates me, this kind of story. The Conservatives need to do better than this, right? Like, they're not going to persuade people. There's a weird disjuncture. You can't persuade people that they're feeling rich if they're not feeling rich, right? Like, when the Conservatives come out and they say, actually, Britain's doing great. If people aren't doing great, that can persuade them. It just makes you look like you're completely out of touch.
Just before we bring Nikki in, isn't that exactly what the Conservatives did in 1983? The country was feeling quite poor. There were strikes. We'd just got out of a recession. People weren't feeling very happy. But we won a war. And that sense of happiness really then led the Conservatives to victory.
Yeah, this isn't winning a war, though, is it? I mean, let's face if the Falklands War was a real accomplishment, I'm not saying that people might disagree about the extent to which Margaret Thatcher should have benefited from that, but that was a real accomplishment. That was a thing that she did. And also, frankly, a lot of people in the 80s, it was a very divisive decade, they were feeling better off. I think that's something
by the end of the 80s, certainly, but the early part of the 80s, not so much.
Some people, the Conservatives were very ruthlessly targeted who they were trying to make better, in the same way that people forget that actually average incomes during the 30s went up, right? We just don't really often remember that. But again, that was a real accomplishment. Whereas this is just a line on a chart. If the Conservatives had gone out and won a war against a fascist dictatorship that invaded a British territory, I would not criticise Jeremy Hunt for suggesting that we should celebrate it, but that's not what they've done.
Nikki, let's bring you in at this stage, because Jeremy Hunt also says we were among the fastest countries in the G7 to recover from the pandemic, and since 2020, we have grown faster than France and Germany. What do you make of it?
Well, where's the money? I mean, the money's in the pockets of not the people that need it. That's the problem, isn't it? Exactly what Henry says, and we agree on this, which is quite interesting for once, which tells you how bad things must be if we're agreeing about it. But, I mean, look, people are stealing baby milk. Children are not going to school because parents can't afford the bus fare for them to get there. They are the real lived experiences of the economic situation in this country. So it's all well and good Hunt and Sunak coming out and saying, oh, it's not as bad as we thought it was, we're only as worse off as everybody else is in Europe. It doesn't matter if you can't afford the basics in your life. I don't know what it is about Sunak. Is it because he's so rich? He continuously misjudges how to deliver information about how OK Britain is. It's like he lives in a different universe to us, and he just kind of presides over us and tells us it's going to be OK, and therefore we feel better about it. Sorry, Rishi, it's not that simple, and people won't be hoodwinked that way.
Henry, I suppose this data really shows that Britain is not an outlier. We're perhaps slightly better than France and Germany, but we're still in that bucket with France and Germany and the sclerotic European countries and their low growth. The real outstanding outlier here is the United States of America, which is just growing gangbusters ahead of any European country. What are they doing differently?
What aren't they doing differently? I mean, America is a country with an awful lot of problems. We should obviously make that clear. But what does America do? One, America builds things. America is building houses, infrastructure, so people can afford to live. Even states like California, which until recently took an almost British view of the inappropriateness of housing, have just passed some of the biggest pro-housing reforms. They have a much more flexible labour market, and they exploit their natural resources, right? If America discovers shale gas, or they've just discovered a vast amount of new minerals that are needed for next-generation technology, they go, all right, let's dig some mines. Whereas in this country, as I'm sure you know, what would happen is that they'd be under some hedgerow or other, and we would leave them where they are.
There would have to be a new there would have to be a newt survey done, and then a bat survey, and then it wouldn't have to disrupt the natural environment.
That hotel Boris Johnson's had to build his swimming pool. Yeah, all of that, but on a vast scale. So they embrace change.
Nicky Hodgson, isn't that the problem, really? In perhaps this is a European mindset thing. The Americans are fracking, for example. The price of energy in the United States did not spike in the way it spiked in Europe.
No, but they've got a massive opioid crisis. They've got people with no healthcare benefits. You know, they've got an illiteracy problem. I mean, I don't think we should be looking to America as the country that is going to fix it all for us. You know, all that's happening in the West in general is the gap between the poorest and the richest is widening. In this country, we talk about we've got no money. There's £540 billion sat in offshore accounts from so-called British taxpayers. There's loads of money, we're just not going after it in the right ways.
Nikki, just a moment ago you touched on the economic situation and what it means for real people and the pounds in their pockets. And there's a story out today about child poverty. And more than 1 million children in the UK, really shocking, sleep on the floor or share a bed. This is a new study.
I mean, this just beggars belief. How is this Britain in 2023? Yeah, it's a very damning report from Bernardo's, the children's charity, that has found that, 1 million children are either bed sharing with adults or other children, or they're sleeping on the floor. 440,000 children sleep on the floor, apparently. I just can't even imagine this. It's kind of conjuring up images of, you know, Victorian England to me, this kind of level of poverty. And I think what's upsetting about it is we know there are lots of children in poverty, actually. We know kids aren't being fed properly and, you know, there's the whole debate about free school meals and all the rest of it. But the idea that they don't even have a bed to sleep in and that then they go to school and they haven't had a proper good night's rest, this is so basic. How are we in this situation?
Now, Henry, I suppose our population has grown by millions of people, and yet we build only 200,000 homes a year. That's got to be part of this.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about Victorian Britain is, you know, people often judge the Victorians about how things were at the beginning rather than the end. But the reason that we have so many Victorian houses now is because they did slum clearances, right? They took lots of deeply substandard housing stock, they knocked it down, they built houses that we're still living in today. And ultimately, I think the important thing is that when we talk about the housing crisis, often, I'm guilty of this, right? I'm a policy wonk. We talk about it in terms of GDP, we talk about it in terms of units. This is what it looks like for real people. It means overcrowding, it means crumbling stock, it means damp, which leads to rot, which leads to all kinds of stuff. And it's lots and lots of human suffering is buried beneath the dry technical debate about the housing crisis.
Yeah. And also, in this report, you know, there's some really damning detail. So, for example, there's they did some investigation. They found that a 3-year-old was sleeping in a baby's cot, a 17-year-old was sleeping in a 7-year-old's bed, and one of the people that was interviewed that literally didn't have a bed for her child is paying the bedroom tax. It just doesn't make any sense. And all we hear continuously from certain kinds of Tories is that, you know, benefits are costing too much, people are sponging. You know, it's just not the reality of life in Britain right now.
That's very interesting. The spare room subsidy deduction is for people with extra rooms compared to the number of people in their household.
I don't know how that works. So how on earth, you know, it's to do with, so I don't know what that's about. But
well,
that's the story you can
Bernardo's are calling it bed poverty. And they're saying that it's something that people take for granted, but it is £200 on average to buy a basic new single bed with bedding, £240 on average for a double. It is something that you wouldn't think about, but it is a massive expense.
It is a big expense for some people, and I think this again loops back to why I'm so frustrated by the original source of story, because the fact is there's an awful lot of people in this country who are more or less insulated from its economic condition. You know, they own their homes outright, they bought them a long time ago, they have a nice comfortable house, many of them have a substantial contribution to their income, or even their whole income coming from pensions, which of course are protected by the government. And so I think it's important that people realise that actually, in many respects, the United Kingdom is increasingly a poor country. We're poorer than the poorest state in the United States. I think it's Mississippi. I don't want to slander it if that's the wrong one. But we are a poor country. Lots of people are getting by on not very much, and that causes this. And when Jeremy Hunt is there going, actually, things are fine, and you've got someone who's completely disconnected from the real economy going, oh yeah, maybe they are, that breeds complacency, which we can't afford.
Well, Henry, you say that potentially we're a poor country and that politicians are not caring about the proper issues, but I'll have you know that plastic packaging, a ban on plastic packaging for takeaways, might well be too expensive to enforce, but is still being proposed. Is this what our government should be focusing on most?
Well, I don't understand how this policy is still on the table, you know, when we've got all this debate about ULEZ. Rishi Sunak has gone back on his environmental pledges. Why are we focusing on this? Because it's the small businesses that have to sort it out, perhaps? Feels like we're going after small businesses with this.
So this is from Sunday. Takeaways and restaurants in England can be fined £200 if they hand out single-use plastic cutlery, polystyrene cups and containers. But the issue is...
And we wonder why we're poor.
Restaurants aren't even aware of it, and it starts this weekend.
Yeah, wow. It seems absolutely mad. The communication means that an awful lot of businesses are going to be stung. But ultimately, this is an insane policy on several levels, right? That ultimately, we've been led astray by the fact that landfill looks bad on television, right? It looks terrible when you've got a truck and lots of rubbish. But ultimately, with landfill, it doesn't take up that much space. You bury it, and then when as we are, you know, we're developing microbes which can eat and break down plastics, right? That's in development. If it was all in landfill, we'd simply dig it up, put those in, and it would all be gone.
And surely if it's in landfill, it's not in turtles.
No,
it's not going into the sea.
And you know where it is, and you can deal with it later. Instead, what happened is that in order to avoid landfill, we shipped it off to China to get recycled, and they dumped it into the oceans. So all of these policies are as a result, basically, of offshoring our environmental commitments. So now, I'm a big believer in net zero and actually environmental policy. But environmental policy is clean energy, right? It's about cleaning up the grid. It's about making sure that international shipping is done cleanly. That's the stuff that will make a difference, not grinding policies like this that just make everyone's lives slightly worse. I want plastic straws back. Paper straws are rubbish.
Do you agree on the big straw debate? This is something that actually really genuinely annoys me. If I get a large drink, it's dissolved by the time I've got halfway through my drink.
The best thing to do is get your own straw made of silicone or something like that.
I've got
carry it around
straws.
with you.
Do you carry around straw? Do you have a straw on you now?
I personally don't, but lots of people do. I've been told. Anyway, I mean,
do you have a straw on you?
I do.
Ellie just whispered, I do. And where do you keep the straw? It's ridiculous. How are we supposed to live like this? This is regression. It feels like we've gone backwards as a society.
Tommy, it's not. Do you know what? Sometimes I do think about this back in the day, what people were really good at is reusing stuff. You know, you had something, it didn't serve its purpose anymore, you made it into something else. I always remember Joanna Lumley randomly talking about turning into a skirt into a dress with a bit of elastic on telly and thinking this was like the easiest thing they used to do when they would go out. And I do think we've got to get better at reusing what we've got. It's no burden to carry a straw in your handbag. Obviously, you're a guy, you're going to have to figure a solution out, whether it's a man bag or not, I don't know. But I really do agree with Henry on this. It's targeting, as per usual, the wrong people. It's a headline winner, but it damages small businesses or the cost gets passed on to the consumer and it doesn't fundamentally make a big change to helping the environment.
This is about litter. It's not about CO2. This isn't going to bring down our emissions, right? This is about whether or not the street looks tidy, I suppose.
Which we used to manage, right? Like, I think, in the not too distant past, in recent living memory, I think we managed to generally keep the streets clean, right?
Until we got rid of all the bins because of terrorists.
Well, yeah, precisely. So it's a deeply, on so many levels, it's just a deeply depressing story. And how would you carry a straw around? Because obviously, if you're using the old rule about the cigarette holders, as men, they can only be as long as the gloves with your outfit. We can only wear short gloves. We can only have short straws.
Well,
Well, I do have a solution. I do actually have a solution. I do have a solution to this problem. I just think everyone should be issued with government Tupperware. Tupperware box.
Oh my
God.
A national Tupperware service. That's the answer.
That is
Everyone can
5
have their
years
own
away from being
Tupperware, and they can
policy.
take it to the takeaway, eat the takeaway, wash it up when they want.
And they'll make it smaller so that your portion sizes get smaller, so combat the obesity crisis.
Yes, exactly.
We're joking now, but I mean, is this that far removed from some of the crackpot policy that this government comes up with? I mean, Nikki, as someone who's sort of more on the left, do you not think that generally this hasn't really been a very conservative government for the last 13 years?
I don't really know about that. I mean, they haven't been a very able government, I would say. I don't really care what party they are at this stage. You know, they've got to go back to doing the basics, keeping people safe, you know, keeping people in jobs, keeping people educated, children educated, and that's not happening. The fact they're inept is my issue with them, not that they're Tories.
Henry, it is Tory conference this weekend. What are your reflections on the last?
And it is, in fact, 30 years since the Back to Basics speech, which obviously he did so brilliantly for John Major. I mean, ultimately, this is Rishi Sunak's last chance to try and give voters, his own MPs, his own party activists, some idea of why he actually wants to be Prime Minister and what a country... The thing is, I cover the Conservative Party for a living. If I gave Rishi Sunak a magic wand and said, wave this, and the Britain of your dreams will come into being, I have no idea what that looks like.
Everyone would be doing maths.
Most conservative leaders, the good ones, the bad ones, you at least kind of know what they want. Really don't know that with Rishi. And partly that's because he came in after Liz Truss just trying to put the fire out. But we're still there. And all of his policies, he's just lurching from thing to thing. You know, oh, maybe this week I'm going to ban smoking. Maybe this week I'm going to crack down on people cracking down on car users. Like, there's no common theme. They just seem to be lurching from crisis to crisis and focus group to focus group. And that's not going to win, right? It's never going to win. And I think a lot of Conservatives are frustrated that he's not doing what Labour did in the last years of New Labour, passing loads of stuff. If you're 20 points behind in the polls and you're not going to win the next election, go for it. You can pass whatever you want.
People complain about diversity offices in the NHS. That's as a result of the Equality Act passed in 2010.
But there's nothing there. So this is his last chance to make an impact.
I completely agree with Henry. I mean, I really wonder why he's in politics, apart from the obvious answer, which is power, because he's got all this money and he's got all this ability. He's a very smart guy. I don't know why he doesn't just start giving Elon Musk a run for his money and go and say he's going to sort out space. I don't, why is he even doing this job?
Oh, that would be a great vision. A British space... we have a UK space agency. We never really do anything with it. Time to colonise the moon. And on that point, Nikki and Henry, thank you so much for talking us through those issues. It's been an absolute delight to have you here this morning.
Now, up next, it's the live desk with Mark Longhurst, and he's here to tell us all about it. Good morning to you, Mark. What's coming up on today's programme?
Yeah, Ellie, thanks very much indeed. Coming up, we'll have the very latest live from Merseyside after a major incident is declared. At least one person seriously injured. 50 other children on board this school bus that overturned on the M53. The latest we have is that Alderhay Children's Hospital says it is handling a major emergency. Sophie Reap, our correspondent there, live for us. Also coming up, the taxing times as Priti Patel warns Tory leaders bills are unsustainable. It's been revealed, of course, our tax burden are the highest of any post-war government. Is it set to become the major battleground for this weekend's party conference? And yet more pressures on our pocket. A warning that our fuel bills could be 13% more expensive than last year. Another winter of discontent, maybe.
Oh, gosh, what a dark note to end on. Mark, we look forward to it, and let's hope that there's perhaps some solutions in there too. Well, we've come to the end of our show, and it's absolutely flown by. Thank you so much for being with us throughout it. Up next, of course, is Mark Longhurst and the Live Desk, and Britain's Newsroom is back next Monday at 9:30 in the morning.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. +2 showers for some of us today, mostly towards the northwest. Sunny spells elsewhere, and actually it is largely fine in the south as a ridge of high pressure builds in. But we've still got low pressure to the north of Scotland. Tightly packed isobars here, so strong winds through the day. And quite a number of showers, especially for the Northern Isles, Caithness, Sutherland, parts of Aberdeenshire. Fewer showers further south. 1 or 2 for Northern Ireland, Northern England, but across the southern half of the UK, mostly it's dry with sunny spells and feeling warm with lighter winds in the south, 18 to 21 Celsius. Not feeling quite so warm with 14 or 15 in the north of Scotland. Into the evening, the showers continue for a time in the far north, but eventually they'll ease away. Likewise, the winds will begin to peter away, and so Clear skies, lighter winds, well, that will lead to a cooler night compared with recent nights, with temperatures fairly widely in the single figures, and in some sheltered parts of northern England, Northern Ireland and Scotland, low single figures. Touch of grass frost possible as we begin the weekend. But actually, Saturday gets off to a beautiful start. Plenty of sunshine across the country early on, and we keep that sunshine in the far south and southeast through the day, likewise for the north of Scotland. Elsewhere, cloud builds, and for Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland, northwest England and North Wales, outbreaks of rain move in. The rain heavy in Northern Ireland, where it will be windy as well.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.